From WGDR, I'm Jackie Batten, and this is Lessons from a Radical Model, Episode 28, Hope for Change.
I guess one of the things that is really important to me, that keeps me going, is the hope that there is a possibility for change. If I didn't have that hope, I'm not sure I would be able to sustain this kind of work.
That was Mimi Yahn. Mimi is a feminist, progressive writer, social theorist, activist, and artist. How do language and popular culture create a climate of bias and bullying? How do children and adults learn violence and antisocial attitudes? And how can we begin transforming ourselves and our world to create a pro-social society? Mimi explores these questions in her transformative process work in uprooting bias and bullying. I had the chance to sit down with Mimi to discuss what it means to uproot bias and bullying. We also discussed feminism through experience and hoping for change. Here's Mimi. You identify as a feminist, progressive writer, social theorist, activist, and artist. And I'm just wondering where this passion is rooted.
I grew up as what is known in New York as a red diaper baby, which is that my mother was a progressive. She was a communist in her youth, and my older sister took me on ban the bomb demonstrations when I was really young. But out of 5 kids, I'm the only one who really had the passion for it. My older sister to some extent, but so I'm not entirely sure. You know, part of it was the family I grew up in, but I have to say, always been aware of social injustice and got into trouble in school a few times, like 2nd grade and 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade for, standing up to a variety of things, racism and all sorts of things, economic justice. And so I guess I always had that in me, and just the chutzpah to do something about it, even though other than that I was very quiet and shy. But when something pissed me off, it would, send me into action. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've maintained. I just kind of, I believe in respecting human rights and, the environment. And I also have come to a lot of my beliefs and my core belief system and my activism through personal experience. I had a lot of awful things happen to me as a female. Molested by a teacher, stopped from learning math in junior high school because the teacher said girls weren't allowed to speak in his class because we were too stupid to learn math. So that ended my math education for quite some time. And I wound up dropping out of school. So there was a lot of, and then over the years there was more abuse and things that pretty much the normal things that happen to women in our very misogynist, patriarchal world. And dropping out of high school meant that I didn't get the same kind of education that other people got, and I didn't really understand and come to feminism until later. I was progressive in all other ways, but living in a patriarchal world, I accepted so much of what we all accept. Really, misogyny is woven into our everyday lives, and you have to work hard to see it and to pull those threads out and to really recognize it for what it is. Otherwise, it is just so ingrained in us, and we accept so much without questioning it. So it took me a while to come to that realization, and it happened because of what happened to me, because of the marginalizations and the sexual assaults and the physical assaults. So my whole approach to everything, including feminism, is rooted in that everyday life, the realities, not the theories so much. I developed the theories based on what is like living in this world, either as a woman or as a transsexual or as a black person or Hispanic or Native American, all of these different things. What does it really mean? I'm talking about it from the day-to-day life experiences. I also discovered in the 90s that I have a passion for figuring out ways to quantify injustice. I discovered that I like math, even though it was interrupted, and I had to teach myself. But I really was good at it, and discovered that I really love using numbers to be able to say, this is the reality, not, it seems like. Well, how do you prove it? So much of my work since the 90s has been figuring out ways to quantify social injustice. The first one that I did was a long-term, over almost a century, studying Hollywood movies and tracking levels of the gender roles, the starring roles by gender, and then comparing that to what was happening on a decade-by-decade basis in the U.S., both, just a whole bunch of things. Economically, culturally, politically, just all the different things that were happening, to see how much does Hollywood perhaps influence America, and how much does America influence Hollywood? I just wanted to kind of see what kind of changes there were. And it was sparked because of the conversation among feminists in the 90s that I kept hearing the same thing. It seems like there aren't as many women in movies anymore. Well, to me, I'm saying that you have to, what does that mean? You have to actually be able to prove it. Are there or are there not? How do you prove it? So that was where that started. And I discovered it was really fun doing that. I also discovered how shocking it was, how the numbers of women who starred in movies dropped. And also looked at the number of women behind the scenes as directors, as writers, as producers, and that was dropping as well. So that was the beginning of that passion for quantifying injustice. What I've been doing since the year 2000 is tracking levels of hate speech and biased language on primetime television. And that, again, was sparked by some conversations about it seems like there's so much nasty language against females on television. So, okay, is there? How does it compare to other groups? And, so I simply tracked it. I taped these shows, primetime television, and counted. I didn't determine what the groups were. Television does, which groups are targeted, whether it's ethnicity or physical appearance, age. There's just a wide range of things that people are targeted. And then I created the 4 categories, 2 for biased language and 2 for hate speech, and was shocked at the findings, which is that, yes, indeed, women are targeted at far, far higher levels than any other group. And the next highest is males. So they're targeted at around 14% of all the hate speech biased language incidents, but females are targeted at between 60 and 70%. So there's a huge, huge disparity. And then all these other groups that people think, must be Arabs or this or that. Well, actually, no. They're, for the most part, under 1%. Which is amazing. And I do this, it's a longitudinal study, so I've been doing it actually since the year 2000. And that is partly why I continue to be interested in popular culture, seeing how popular culture is so important in really forming our attitudes and maintaining the culture that we have that is very misogynist, very much based on hierarchies and bullying and dominance and submission, and this is our social paradigm. And bullying, by the way, became another thing that I started studying because when I looked at the results after 9/11, it was looking horribly like television was becoming a training ground for bullies. It was just this huge shift, and so I began looking at that as well.
So you recently gave a talk at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Springfield, Vermont, called Transformative Processes, Uprooting Bias and Bullying, which connects to what you were talking about before in your work, where you explore bullying as well as hate speech and biased language on primetime television. You were talking about this before. Would you say that there's something there that's grounded in your own personal narrative?
I'm not sure. Probably everything is to one degree or another. But I have a tendency to link things. I see things as interconnected, and the different back and forth causal relationships, and things that some people may not think are related. I do. I see that, and so I think that this is also part of my work, is pulling together all these what might seem like disparate threads and actually showing how they are interconnected and how they create this total paradigm, our social paradigm. And I guess one of the things that is really important to me, that keeps me going, is the hope that there is a possibility for change. I think if I didn't have that hope, I'm not sure I would be able to sustain this kind of work. And the work is also can be extremely discouraging and depressing, because I look at what happens to, what oppression does, primarily with women, but all peoples, just the whole thing of violence and oppression. And there are times where it is hard to continue. It's hard to feel hope if this is what the humans are capable of, and and especially the direction that we all seem to feel that we're going in. I mean, have we reached the point of no return? So I guess part of my work is always looking for something redeeming, something to give hope, something it gives purpose to it for me. What is the point of studying all this if there's never going to be anything more than just the same? At least that's, I think, how I feel about it. Some years ago, back in the 90s actually, when I first started feeling that humans are basically pro-social, I really felt that. But I felt that even if that wasn't true, that we have the capacity to create a pro-social paradigm rather than antisocial, which is what we have. If it's not in our nature, we certainly can train ourselves. We've trained ourselves to be violent. We can train ourselves to be nonviolent. So that began sort of spreading through a lot of my work. Well, is it possible to change? And, what do we need to change? What are the problems and how can we change? So that's been in the background of a lot of my work. And just deeper and deeper studies about what is it that makes us antisocial. Why do we have social injustice? Why do we have environmental degradation? And the common feeling that people have is that we are naturally violent, that is something that's part of the human nature. So I have never really bought into that. And a few years ago, I really started feeling on this kind of gut level that there is another instinct that humans have, which is to be pro-social and to elevate the species. And I kind of felt like I want to study that. That might be some graduate work that I would like to do in the future. How to prove it is really difficult, but I think that things like art, why do people become artists? Why do they become musicians? Why do they become writers? It's certainly not to attract the opposite sex or the same sex or anything, because a lot of times it's a pretty awful life. You don't make a lot of money. You're not going to, so, and the few people who get famous, okay, well, sure, they're attractive to some people, but, the vast majority of us work in isolation and poverty. Why do we do it? What is it that drives us? And I think it's this deep drive to elevate the species. So then when I started doing undergraduate work in my first year, I really started studying bullying. And I wrote a paper that I submitted to Encounter, which is a peer-reviewed educational journal. And they accepted it. I was like, wow, yay. And it was called The Social Context of Bullying. And I really took on a lot of the current thinking about bullying and what consists of bullying, what isn't, and I really just, I kind of tore it to pieces. I did a lot of critical thinking, and I was able to back up things, and I wanted to show that bullying is something that we learn in our social context, that we are taught it, the way our society is set up. Of course we're going to learn bullying because that's what it's all about. The hierarchies, the dominance and this is, but is that natural? I don't think it is. And the more I looked into it as I was writing the paper and doing the research and doing the packet work, there was these things that were coming out. It was not long before that, the gene for altruism had been discovered. Rebecca Solnit was doing her work studying what happens in the aftermath, immediately after disasters, and showing that people's very first instinct is to come together to help one another, not to be gouging, not to be violent, not to take advantage of others. That does happen later. But the very first instinct that people have, people put their lives in jeopardy to help other people. This is a pretty understood, well-known fact that's been shown many times. And the fact that there is actually a genetic proof, that scientific proof that we are actually altruistic. And so that's sort of tied into the whole thing. Well, actually, okay, then maybe we are naturally pro-social. So maybe creating a social paradigm that is pro-social, that is rooted in helping one another rather than being competitive and dominating and bullying and being violent, then that makes it quite possible, because that actually would be our first instinct. And unteaching that and teaching us to be violent is very unnatural and would really, if you think about it, result in a very, very fractured society with all kinds of mental illness issues and all sorts of horrible things happening, which is actually what we see happening in our society.
Right.
We're not healthy. We haven't, to be insane is to be sane, because who can really cope in this kind of insanity? We really do have a world that is quite insane and quite destructive. And
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole concept that we are taught there's only two genders is so destructive to every human being.
I'm Jackie Batten, and this is Lessons from a Radical Model. More with Mimi Yahn when we return.
Once we were a nation of ideals. The world looked to us to set them free. Democratic revolution, peace and justice, we will lead you now. They pay the price for our liberties. Days of waiting, nights of tracers, bombs smashing into human flesh. Nations shattered just for profit. How does it feel to be an enemy of the state?
Enemy of the State from Mimi Yahn. I'm Jackie Batten. This is Lessons from a Radical Model, episode 28, Hope for Change. I'm in conversation with feminist, progressive writer, social theorist, activist, and artist Mimi Yahn about how to make change towards ending bullying. I think that your point about how do we change this, or how do we shift the thinking about this is really, it's so complicated. But I think even the work that you're doing in talking about it and bringing light to it and helping other people in your analysis and your research and your knowledge, helping other people understand it, it's the normalization of it that is incredibly problematic. Taking down a whole popular media kingdom is hard. But if we're able to help people understand it for what it is and then educate people, that's something direction that's within our reach.
It is, and that's the direction that I want to go in. One of the things that I want to do is develop curriculum and workshops for children and young adults for critical viewing skills. So that, we're not saying, oh, you can't watch that, or play these really horrifically violent video games, which they really are. They're pretty appalling. And when you're talking about someone who plays it for many hours a day after day, what's going to happen in 10 years? They actually will be trained to, and yes, we are having an increase in mass shootings. So, yeah, there is actually an impact. And particularly people who might be unstable to begin with or have a really bad home life or just, whatever problems. And what they're doing is playing these video games, particularly the first-person shooter games, and they're, you're training the brain to shoot and to, do mayhem. So,
For anyone to argue that that's not what's going on,
Yeah.
to me, it's just
I
like,
know.
I
Really?
don't
Seriously?
understand.
because there's a lot of money behind, but yeah, and
exactly.
they do control the conversation. The gaming industry and the media, they control the conversation because that's what gets on the internet. That's the biggest outlets. That's the message that is continually put across. So that's the message that people are most likely to hear, because who owns these outlets that where the magazines and the online sites. So if children and young adults are taught that, okay, you watch the show, you love the show, it's a great show for you, but think about what message this is, and really teaching people to understand how you're being manipulated. People don't like to be manipulated. I think there really is a way to unlearn that stuff and to relearn something. You can still enjoy it, although in my experience, the more aware I become of things, the less enjoyable it becomes. It's just, it's not so funny as it used to be anymore, or not quite so enjoyable, Well, fine, you find other things that are, just as enjoyable or more enjoyable. So I don't think that it's, at this point, a matter of going up against the machine, at least my role in it. The role that I see for what I might be effective at doing is showing people, first of all, what this means, what this is doing, what this is teaching you, and then resisting it, how to resist that, and how to not be like that, and how to actually laugh at it and, not take it seriously, and replace it with another paradigm, which is also a difficult thing. And that's why the other part of what I want to do eventually is work with teachers and faculty, not with kids. When it comes to bullying, kids know what bullying is. And this is what all the programs are directed towards, is teaching the kids how not to bully. Well, come on, really, they know what it is. They know when it happens to them. They know when they're doing it. They may pretend, but it's the adults who are actually the most clueless, who either don't see it because they don't want to see it, or are afraid because of liability issues. And, this has been a huge problem. And they don't understand that it comes from all these other sources. It isn't just one child acting in a vacuum. And it isn't just one child whose parents or whose father or anyone else in their family is being violent. It isn't just that. It is every single day the messages that they are getting, including the message that when they bully or when they get bullied, nobody does anything about it. Well, that's a really powerful message. If you want to reinforce bullying, that's a great way to do it. So but then what do you do about it? What kind of curriculum can you provide? What kind of social studies and understandings can you provide to the children? I had an interesting conversation with somebody saying, of course the boys now are taught in school how to be respectful to girls. And no, they're not. We thought that was the direction we were going to go in back in the 90s, before Reagan and the the backlash against females, that happened right around the year 2000. And so, it's been downhill ever since. And no, those are not being taught. Quite the opposite is being taught.
I haven't seen any of that.
No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't. There might be a school here and there, and certainly there are parents here and there. But what you're up against is, it isn't enough any longer to think that your family is going to be the biggest influence, not in the world that we live in. The social media, and that's the other thing about popular culture and social media, the reason I study it, the reason why I put so much stock in it, is because of our instinct to be pro-social, which is also an instinct to want to share stories, to tell stories. That's a really basic human thing, to tell our own story, to hear the stories. Stories are incredibly important as humans. It teaches us how to live and why. It's really, really crucial. So our national, ubiquitous, homogenized, monolithic storyteller is popular culture. This is our modern-day mythology. The Greeks had the myths and, the gods and everything. What we have today is popular culture, is television and movies and the characters. And this is what really has so much influence and impact on us. And the medium, well, the physical medium itself is very powerful. Staring at that screen, or when you look, the large screen movies, it's really, there is a visceral reaction.
Mm-hmm.
When you watch a show that you like and there's a character and something happens and you really react, you cry. You go to, Casablanca, everybody loves Casablanca. You cry, it's just, yes. They're extremely powerful, and it is our national storyteller, our national consciousness, or international, as human beings. So it has an extraordinary influence, far beyond, I think, what most people realize, and how much control it has over the brain and the emotions and how you behave. So part of the uprooting stuff has to do, and the whole term transformative, I know it's used in different ways, but the way I use it is by internalizing the positive things, because right now what we do is internalize negative messages against our own selves, against others. We're continually internalizing these things and then reinforcing them. So language is a huge way. So, for example, the B word. It's extremely popular. Every time you use it, you're internalizing disrespect for females, even if you yourself are a female. It is a hate speech word. It is. It's an epithet. It's a gender epithet. The fact that we have normalized it and that it's okay to use it, that doesn't mean it is still actually very derogatory. It is one of the most derogatory terms used against females. So how do we uproot that sort of thing? The way I did it was that I decided, when I realized what an awful term it was, I decided I was not going to use that word ever again. So what happened was every time I started to use the word, I stopped, and it forced me to remember why I vowed not to use it, and the whole concept of respecting women. And eventually what happened is that became second nature. That is what I began to internalize far more deeply. And so there is like this knee-jerk respect for females now, which we don't have in this world.
On that note, on a final note,
yes.
how do we hope for change? How do we build resilience in these times?
I have really been very, very heartened by the discovery that we really are hardwired to be pro-social. We are not wired to be violent. There is actually no evidence that shows that we have any genetic disposition. There is nothing in our genetics that, other than the occasional sociopath. Got one in the White House. So, so yes, we do have evidence that sometimes there's a bad seed, but the vast majority of people really are born to be the instinct to be pro-social, to help one another. And we have to find our way back to that. We have brains. We have the capacity to actually do that. If we have the capacity to teach people who are not violent, and we have the capacity to teach them to be violent, then we have the capacity to teach people to be what we are instinctively. That's a whole lot easier. The hard part is that the tide is now, but look at what humans were before, 10,000 years ago, before this all started. So, yeah, I think there is hope. And people have to find their own individual ways to begin making that difference. And, it's not going to be sending postcards to the White House or hanging banners on Main Street. That isn't going to do it. This has to be something where you really are going to change some other person's life, make a difference that will really be meaningful, that will promote this pro-social type of thing in a way that is bigger than what you have been doing. So many people volunteer. We have to take the next step, do it, some kind of volunteering, some kind of outside of our comfort zone. Because we're really, actually, yes, there's still hope, but we're really things are not good. We really are heading in a very, very bad direction. But we have to really get back to understanding what every little child knows before the child is taught that they don't have the right or the ability. We do. We actually do. We have that ability. We have that ability to bring back democracy, to bring back communities that care for each other and with each other. and reach out to others. We really do have that capacity. It is natural in us. It takes some work, but I mean, really, do we have a choice? Are we really going to let this slide into just the horrible, horrible stuff that is being done every day in our name? You know, we're sort of like, especially now, like what happened in Germany. I mean, what did they tell? What are they telling their grandchildren? What did they say to their grandchildren afterwards? So we really want to be in that position, and knowing that we have the ability to make this change. We really do. We just have to get up off our butts and really just find whatever it is that will motivate you, that will really make an actual difference, where you can really see some tangible results and really feel like we're moving towards a better future. And I am paying it forward, the pro-socialness, you know, and be aware of what, you know, if you have kids, really start paying attention to what the video games they're playing, what music they're listening to, the shows that they watch. And if you're a parent, you have the right to say, no, I don't want you to learn this. I really don't want you to learn this. I want you to learn something completely different. This is what this is teaching you, and this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can find more information about Mimi Yahn at decolonizingourhistory.com and progressiveinstincts.wordpress.com. You've been listening to Lessons from a Radical Model, Episode 28, Hope for Change. This program is brought to you by WGDR, Goddard College Community Radio, with financial support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Music you heard included periodicals from Blue Dot Sessions and Mimi Yahn with Enemy of the State. For WGDR, I'm Jackie Batten, your host. Join me next week for more Lessons from a Radical Model.